What happens when a corporate defense attorney goes from representing large, powerful chemical manufacturing companies to fighting against them after learning about the impact of their toxic waste in a small community? What if you then learned that one of the main toxic chemicals is used to create non-stick or waterproof surfaces for common household objects, is present in drinking water, and can be found within 99% of people across the world who have been tested for it? This story is depicted in a movie called Dark Waters, where Rob Bilott, played by actor Mark Ruffalo, risked his entire career and livelihood to uncover a series of environmental injustices connected to a growing number of unexplained diseases and deaths in animals and humans.
This is the Public Health Insight Podcast.
Before we move on, it is important to note that the views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not represent any of the organizations we work for or are affiliated with.
Welcome to Rewind, a new limited series brought to you by Public Health Insight, where we explore the public health connections in some of our favorite TV shows, movies, music, books, other non-traditional media, and pop culture. My name is Gordon, and I'll be your host for this episode, along with my fellow co-hosts, LaShawn, Perva, Bindra, and Juwaria. In this episode, we'll be taking a closer look at a movie released in 2019 called Dark Waters. But before we get into it, let's rewind. Alright, so we're gathered here today to talk about a very interesting movie that we all watched called Dark Waters. So let's start by talking about what this movie was about.
It is based on a true story, which for me was a surprising fact. I knew kind of going in what the movie was about in terms of, water pollution and things like that. I didn't know it was based on a true story, so that was very interesting to me. But, you've got essentially a lawyer, environmental lawyer, corporate defense attorney. He's kind of our main character in the movie. And we navigate with him over a span of quite a few years. I believe it's from 1998 to 2015, where he's kind of fighting a case on behalf of this one town that's kind of at the receiving end of a lot of pollutants in their drinking water from a specific powerhouse chemical company.
And what was that chemical company?
DuPont. Yeah, so a bit of more context on that. So the chemical company was named DuPont, and they were actually based specifically in West Virginia. And the way the movie got started was there was a farmer who was kind of on the receiving end of some of this toxic sludge that this chemical company, as a result of some of their byproducts, were pushing into the connecting rivers and lakes. And the farmers, livestock, and his family were affected directly. And in this particular town that the movie is based on, DuPont has been sponsoring different schools, parks, and they played a large role in their community. If the farmer called for help or asked for help and tried to say negative things about DuPont, it was very much frowned upon, right? So this is kind of where the farmer connected with the main character, Rob Bilott, who was based in Ohio, I believe, Cincinnati.
Right. Cincinnati,
Mm-hmm. And the farmer pleaded for his help because of a connection with his grandma, who also lived in that specific town. So yeah, he pleaded his case, and that's the first time the main character, Rob, encountered that situation.
I think one really cool thing, though, was that Rob wasn't somebody who would fight against chemical corporate companies. His firm that he was in, which was the Taft law firm, where he was a partner, they actually protected these companies. Yeah. So when I thought that was a really cool scene where Wilbur Tennant kind of came in and was like, "Oh, I need your help suing this company," and he's like, "No, I do the exact opposite. I don't do that." So it was a very big step out of what his career was, what his firm did, which right off the bat, it's going to be a really powerful movie just from that first 20 minutes.
The Wilbur Tennant is a farmer.
Yeah.
And he was actually referred to Rob Bilott through Rob Bilott's grandmother, who was aware that he was some kind of environmental lawyer, but she didn't even know he represented chemical companies. So he was at sort of a moral crossroads, being traditionally representing these chemical companies and now having to, represent a plaintiff who's actually making or wanting to sue a chemical company. So the movie is essentially putting us at the forefront of that moral conflict the whole time.
So what kind of made him pursue the case then, if it was that conflict?
I think it was a little bit of his childhood history when he goes to visit his grandmother, when he's like unsure if he wants to take on the case or not. He sees photo albums of him visiting his grandmother growing up near that farm. And it's interesting how he originally takes on the case just thinking that it'll be a routine procedure and a routine check-in going over whatever general report was made, but instead he unravels this enormous mystery that he has no idea that's going to take him like 10, 15 years to undo.
Right. Yeah. Cost him his health too. So, and then it starts with Wilbur Tennant provides Rob Bilott with some video evidence, shall we say, of what was going on his farm. And I think the evidence was convincing enough to spark Rob Bilott's antenna to look into it further, as you said, Juaria. He was hoping that he would be able to find a simple answer for what was going on, but he realized that it was, like you said, a bigger mystery than what he had hoped to find, and that would change his life, the life of his family, and the life of the firm that he represented forever.
Yeah, I can't imagine what was going through the boss's head of the law firm when Rob comes through and he's like, hey, I'm trying to look into this chemical company.
Right. And for good reason, like their reputation is on the line, right? You can imagine if you're seen as sort of an informant to use a knowledge against the companies that you represent, you could imagine how that would affect the bottom line of a company. Like, I don't think they would probably ever get to represent too many chemical companies after that shenanigans, as some people might see it as.
That's a lot of money down the drain.
For context, that meeting essentially, for those listening who haven't watched the movie, basically Rob Bilott is trying to present his case. This is after he realizes that this, case is going to be more than just routine procedure and report analysis. And he's trying to convince the rest of the partners at the firm that, they're going to need to essentially sue DuPont and, because there's huge mysteries and secrets that they're hiding and chemicals that they're not disclosing to the population. I think that meeting in general, though, was a really big turning point in the movie. Like, it was probably in my head, one of the most impactful moments, because I didn't think his boss was going to stand up for him the way that he did. Everyone, all the partners were so doubtful, and his boss full out just says, have you guys even read all this proof that he has found? There's people dying and suffering because of this, and you guys haven't even read it. You're just saying no because that's apparently what we do. Which I thought that was such a good scene. I thought it was one of the best ones in the movie. It was so good.
I completely agree. That was also my favorite scene. He says in that meeting, we should want to nail DuPont, which was such an interesting ethical statement that's being said in a meeting full of corporate lawyers who defend chemical companies.
It's really interesting in these situations, who's responsible for holding these corporations accountable, right?
Right.
Is it the lawyers or is it it's honestly anyone, right? I feel like anyone who knows of the wrongdoing that's happening, I feel like everyone should try to take a stand to hold them, not just people who are skilled in it.
And that's one of the problems, right? Because it's an unregulated kind of situation in that industry. So they could get away with a lot of different things and cover up a lot of things without having, regulatory bodies or the government holding them accountable for certain things. And I think was a lot of the struggles throughout the movie. The main character, Rob, he would find a breakthrough in the case, and then all of a sudden it gets shut down through a different loophole by DuPont.
Right. And as we learned throughout the movie that the Environmental Protection Agency during that time was especially toothless. What kept coming up in the movie is big chemical companies were expected to self-regulate. So if they did not report any toxic chemicals, then they could not be held accountable for the impact of those toxic chemicals. And you as they start to uncover how things actually work, you begin to see that this was something that was going to be inevitable. You can't put the cat back in the bag, as they say. But that's what Rob Bilott was up against. So what was DuPont actually doing? So we talked about toxic chemicals and how a rural community was affected. I believe there was like a landfill beside Wilbur Tennant where actually his brother used to live there, and it got bought out, and then they turned it into a landfill. And given the proximity of his farm to where the landfill was, his family and his livestock were some of the first things that were affected. He started noticing froth on the water, the rocks turning white, and then it filtered into his animals acting strangely and starting getting tumors and dying early, and that kind of stuff.
And mutations like on their hooves and stuff.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit more about why are we talking about this movie? It was a very interesting movie, and particularly interested for people who are in public health, because there's quite a lot there around the concept of One Health. Throughout this movie, we learned about the chemicals, and clearly there's an impact on humans, but we also saw the cattle being impacted. I think marine life was impacted too, and the environment was impacted as well. So we're learning that this one action, human-driven action, had dire consequences on a whole community. Well, let's talk about the impact on the environment. So the chemical was discharged in landfills, as I mentioned, and the chemical was also, I believe, in the air in some kind of mist, and that also had some consequences to the environment. Like I mentioned, the waters got a little cloudy. And you remember in the beginning of the movie with the scene where those kids were diving in the lake, and then they're like, get out of the water, and spraying stuff in the water. And then come to find out, I was talking to Bindra about this before we started recording. So the chemical that we're going to talk about is called PFOA in the movie, the one specific one in the movie. I believe it was created during World War II by the 3M company to coat tanks. And DuPont started to use it after 3M discontinued the use, and they started using it in household products, right? So, but the problem is when that happened, apparently 3M discontinued it without telling anyone why, but DuPont and 3M were in contact, and apparently 3M had warned them about even though DuPont ended up doing their own studies, 3M warned them about the toxic components of the chemical, and they told them how to dispose it. And they literally did the opposite of what 3M said. So even before they did their own studies, they had enough evidence to know that it wasn't something they should be spraying in the water where people swam and people drank.
I was just going to say, it's really sad how, in any situation, especially for corporations where money obviously can be made, human health, animal health, and, environment is always second of importance, right? It's never the first priority for any of these corporations. It's just very sad to think about.
I think that, especially in today's day and age, One Health is almost always at odds with these enormous corporations and how they push forward their own chain components of business and their own agendas forward. And they will always hide and ignore community and state level problems in order to meet whatever quota that they're trying to set up for their companies, for whatever business it is that they're doing.
So we're talking about this chemical. We're talking about big corporations. Why are we worried about this chemical? What are some of the unique features of this specific chemical? Why we're in Canada? This movie was based in West Virginia. Why do we care about it?
They kind of colloquially, PFOA or C8 is what I think they call it also in the film. It's not just one of this kind of chemicals. There's hundreds of this kind of chemicals, and they're called essentially thousands. Forever chemicals is what they're called, because they just can't be broken down. They mention that, so DuPont uses it in the household products, like Teflon coating has these forever chemicals in it. And it's what was in our nonstick pans, they're on our raincoats, our carpets, makeup. There was a stat that was at the end of the film that said literally everybody, 90% or 99% of the population has forever chemicals in their body, and they're not going to go away because they do not break down. Our bodies can't process that. Right. So, It's not just in humans either. It's the same for animals. It doesn't get broken down in the environment. These things will remain for a long time. And so regulations of this is so important, because the more we have, chemical giants like DuPont chugging these type of things out, it's going to get worse and worse. So trying to create regulations on that, and, you can't. The thing with big corporations is that they're so self-regulated. There's a lot of faith that they're putting in these corporations over here. But having more regulations and laws on that will definitely help with all the, awful effects, which is like the birth defects, the cancer that they found associated with just C8. So there's probably so many associated with thousands of other forever chemicals that are out there.
I think even like spreading awareness, because people probably haven't even watched this movie. People probably don't even know the history behind DuPont as a chemical company. And so just educating people about like what actually goes on behind these chemical companies, and like how their health or like the environment's or like animal health is going to be impacted. Like, I think people just knowing about it and just raising awareness is also a big thing.
Awareness is such an enormous component of the entire situation, because DuPont or other large companies themselves will never do that. And I think in the movie we see that in their own reports, they dehumanize their studies a lot. Instead of using humans or participants, they use words like receptors. And essentially what it does is that it dehumanizes looking at the study or the experiments from the point of view that this is another living human being, right? We're dealing with, and we're talking about chemicals that are essentially bleaching rocks in water. So diluted chemicals in rocks that are able to turn rocks white. So if that's what it's doing to things like, sedimentary rocks or something like that, then imagine what it could be doing to humans and, within the human body.
So we talked about regulation and limits. So there's a point in the movie where they were brought to court, and apparently whichever one comes first, you as a chemical company set the limit, or the EPA sets the limit, and whichever one happens first is the accepted one. And as they were going to court, DuPont established like an ad hoc committee to set drinking water limits. And they set it to the level that was higher than what was found in. And the level that was found in water was universally deemed to be toxic because it was manifesting in the community already. And that somehow was allowed. So we can see, like you said, how problematic the self-regulatory piece is. But I want us to walk through a little bit around his journey of discovering that this chemical was toxic, and the shock, because his wife, Sarah Bilott, at the time, she was staying at home to take care of the family. She was pregnant at the time. And the look of horror on his face when he realized that the nonstick pan that she cooks from every day has the very chemical in it that he's worried about. That was a very emotionally impactful scene for me.
Yeah, I think preceding that one was leading, like it was almost like this climatic series of scenes essentially up to that point where he kind of goes to his house and is talking to his wife about it. But before that, he's like surrounded by these boxes of paperwork where he's trying to play detective, trying to find out, exact paperwork and proof that, they've been putting out these chemicals into the environment. It's an entire compilation of him like sorting through this like paperwork, which arrogantly was given by DuPont because they thought he wouldn't find anything. So he's like looking through, so he gets it all organized. And then you see that aha moment because he sees a picture of these like workers, and he's like literally uses a magnifying glass to see that they worked on the Teflon like team. And he finds all the advertisements and sees a Teflon is like used in all of the stuff in houses, the pots, the nonstick pans and stuff. And first thing he does is rushes home to his wife, and she wakes up to him rummaging in the kitchen, trying to find all these like nonstick pans and stuff. And obviously she's horrified because he essentially says that, we're poisoning our baby by using these things, and she has no context. So she gets scared. And he gives her the whole rundown of how DuPont has known for 40 years that this is going to have a negative impact on populations, and they've done nothing about it. And they've been intentionally poisoning people and literally been commercializing it. So that was such an impactful scene. Oh, goodness. It gave me goosebumps.
And from an epidemiological perspective, you just reminded me. So when he was researching, actually, I think he found that of the 7 women who regularly worked on the Teflon line, 3 of 7 actually had babies with birth defects. And that's a pretty high ratio for something to be random. So at that point, he was pretty worried about his wife having some kind of exposure. And then it also goes to unveil that they did experiments in animals where rats developed tumors and cancers and that sort of stuff. And that they knew that the 3M company, I think, who identified or developed the chemical, did experiments in monkeys and found similar effects. And, just willful neglect for the sake of making profit. And we keep talking about who should be accountable, who should be holding who accountable, what should those consequences be. And it's still an ongoing fight to this day.
Yeah, I was watching another video later on that was like branching off of the movie of what it's kind of like right now. And people are still fighting for this stuff, C8 was shut down, obviously, because of, this 15 years of fighting. Finally, DuPont decided to settle. They also still never, to this date, they've never said that they've never apologized for wrongdoings, and they've never said that they did anything wrong. They just settled the case. And they said that the movie was based off of a lot of falsehoods. After that, C8 got shut down, but there was another similar forever chemical that they made after that called Gen X. And in that video I was watching, a lady who's fighting this fight, she mentions that it's really frustrating because they shut down one chemical and there's 2 more that come and take its place. So it's this ongoing process that's so hard to nail down because there's so many chemicals that they haven't identified.
Right. And this might be a little bit technical, but I was also doing a little bit more research. So the C8, as it says, there's 8 carbons, and the whole group altogether, they're called perfluoroalkyl substances. So they're long chain hydrocarbons with fluoride atoms on there. Makes it very hard to break down because there's very strong chemical bonds. So you might think, and this is why too, when you do advocacy too, it's always good to have solutions because you play whack-a-mole. So what ended up happening is they actually shortened the chain. So I think there is another compound where it's like 4 or 6, but they're actually finding it could be more harmful because it's harder to filter out. So, logic might tell you the longer the chain, the worse it is. But if it goes shorter, it brings another set of consequences as well. So it's more than just something being too long or too short. Perhaps the best approach is to, before anything goes to market, it should be studied for health effects on humans, environment, and animals. And if it's
the
and that should be the requirement.
Principle.
Precautionary principle. You remember that? You want to talk about what that means, Sean?
I mean, I think it's basically being a bit more proactive in the approach of, bringing substances or products to market where it can impact a lot of people. So in the context of these forever chemicals, there should be policies and rules in place for these chemical companies to bring a special product or a special substance like a C8 or a specific Gen X into market. There has to be rigorous testing and safety standards that before it goes to market be passed, because we don't want to get into a situation where we're chasing after these forever chemicals after it's already damaged people. So taking that precautionary approach when it comes to forever chemicals is optimal because it kind of prevents, it's a more preventative measure rather than a reactionary measure.
In rounding it down, so in the movie, Rob Bilott goes through all this work, a lot of opposition, of course, and he notices that there was a law change in West Virginia that allowed, in a lawsuit that affects human health in a sort of community situation, that there's a possibility of medical monitoring. And I thought that was very interesting how the movie displayed that. So they basically, medical monitoring is where there's a suspicious chemical or something that exposes a community for which there is potentially a health risk. The company that created that exposure has to essentially operate the infrastructure and or at least fund the monitoring of the community. So in the movie, in that community, I believe there were 70,000 people that were tested to know, right, to have PFOA in their blood that showed up for testing, and they found overwhelming risk of certain kind of cancers like testicular cancers, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and that sort of was a breakthrough in the case. And because DuPont wasn't expecting that, they had agreed to the settlement sort of preemptively. And then they changed their minds when they realized that the compensation would be ridiculous. So that was another roadblock for DuPont. But they were surprised that DuPont was going to take them to court for every single person on a case-by-case basis. And in the first 3 cases, I think he won like $40 million. And there were still thousands of people to go. So they decided to do sort of a mass settlement and close it out. And then that kind of, hopefully trickled down to the community, and they were able to pay their medical bills and stuff like that. But given that they make $1 billion a year in profit from that chemical, it's a drop in the bucket. And they still were able to get away without claiming responsibility. So it's a win relative to nothing, but there was still a lot of work to be done.
It was such a bittersweet ending because at one side you were like, oh, they finally kind of settled it. People were able to get some compensation for all the health issues that they were going to be facing in the future and were already facing, because I think it was 3,500 people already had one of the 7, and thousands more were probably going to get it eventually. So this was a really, really significant amount of people that were going to be affected. Right. It was so bittersweet because that maybe this one time they were able to settle and give money to these people, but they never agreed that they were in the wrong. They never apologized. They kind of just said, oh, we'll settle it, but that's that. We're never going to, acknowledge that we did anything wrong. And the fact that this is such an ongoing fight, like, it's the one of thousands that you're going to have to try and fight about. So it was such a bittersweet ending. You feel good that, this 15-year journey of this lawyer and that community kind of came to fruition in the way that ideally the best scenario it could have been. But it's just the beginning of however many cases like this.
Right. And apparently at the time it was the biggest epidemiological study like ever or something like that. And it took 4 years. Yeah, 4 years to analyze it. To analyze the data. So and he was under a lot of stress because he thought they were closer, and people were like, hey, didn't you say something good was going to happen? So I think that's when he had his mild stroke or whatever it was, because he was very stressed out. So a lesson learned from that too is when we ask people to advocate on our behalf, or if they choose to advocate on our behalf, there's a huge toll health wise and social wise. He was ostracized almost in a law firm from his colleagues. The people in the community weren't really happy with him, just like they weren't happy with the farmer as well. And his family went through a lot of emotional grief and physical stress because of that. So there's a lot of resilience that's required to do that work, and we must support them in the best way that we can.
Yeah, and one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is this idea of, and we kind of touched on it, this idea of corporate interests. And and I'm kind of biased right now because I just did an episode on the commercial determinants of health, but understanding that it's crazy to see how much influence this corporation had on this community and the global situation, right? 99% of us have PFAs or these forever chemicals within us, right? And like I mentioned earlier, there's so much influence at that community level in terms of sponsoring parks, schools, different activities, their garbage and recycling infrastructure. And there's also that kind of the other side of the coin where DuPont actually employs a lot of the community and gives them work and pays them money. So that conflict and that tension that arose when certain community members started to protest against DuPont. So there was a lot of conflict, and it definitely is a prime example of how these commercial determinants of health, when they go to the extreme end and you have this company producing these chemicals and it's affecting animals, humans, and the environment, and it leads to all these possible and severe health outcomes, that situation is very intense.
Indeed. And one of the lessons learned for me, I started to appreciate the testing of chemicals, medicines, and products more. Because, we have something like vaccines, which are rigorously tested, gets pulled off the market if any adverse thing happens, and then we have just chemicals floating around that we can't seem to do anything about, where we actually know that there are very long-term side effects and health effects, and we can't seem to do anything about it. So this gave me more of an appreciation for things that we actually do rigorously test, and having more confidence when those actually go to the market. And it also, on the other side, I'm appreciating that not everything that's available for access or purchase is safe. So obviously we know about, certain kinds of foods and the compositions and why that's not beneficial to our body, but there's other more dormant things, like even my water bottle here. Like, was this coated in PFOA? And like, should I be assuming that anything I buy is safe? Is that the right assumption? Does it become too burdensome to check every single thing for all the potential chemicals? So, what I'm getting at is the onus should be on those who have the power and the means to actually investigate the stuff, hence the chemical companies and the governmental bodies that are there to actually regulate them.
So, I mean, speaking of those governmental bodies, do you want to hear something wild?
Yes, always.
You're in government now?
Yeah, I'm in government now. No, Will's not
You invented
here.
PFOA when you were in government.
Plot twist.
Okay.
I work for DuPont.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you imagine undercover spy?
Oh, wow.
No, I actually found out on my vacation. I was talking about the movie, and one of my friends works for DuPont.
Has he watched the movie?
Yeah, he said he felt a kind of way about working for them after seeing the movie, but he'll remain anonymous.
Yeah. No, that's for the better. Anyways, the wild thing was, as you were mentioning, checking these different products across your household. I was wondering, this movie was based in the US. I was wondering, what are the laws in Canada regarding these forever chemicals, and specifically PFAS, right? And so what I found was on the Government of Canada website, they actually published something in April 2021. Okay, so a couple months ago, not too long ago. And so what they published was this notice of intent to investigate this broad class of PFAS. And what they want to do in 2021, so this year, they want to continue to invest into research and monitoring of this forever chemical stuff. They want to collect and examine different information to inform what they're going to do about this specific class of chemicals. And they want to make some sort of policy recommendations and see what's happening in other jurisdictions. And within 2 years, they plan to publish a report. The Government of Canada plans to publish this report on the state of PFAS in Canada and abroad to summarize these relevant informations to further make decisions on what they're going to do about it. So this is something that's happening now. Right? That's crazy.
I was going to say, because it makes sense. It's so recent. I do feel like in Canada, a lot of regulations, because we have a case-based law system, so to say, that things don't come into regulation unless someone makes a case about it. For biobanks, for example, there's no regulation on ownership unless there is somebody in court that goes and fights about their ownership. And then based off that case, there will be laws put in place. So that's interesting that, that they're starting at least where is the current situation with. I think that's going to be really good because it may give opportunity for regulations to come up, because who knows what those numbers are going to look like.
Yeah. But you know what? There's also, and maybe it's a bit of an unknown elephant in the room. So because these chemicals could potentially impact more affluent populations, because we know that, for example, drinking water advisories for how many decades for certain, indigenous communities and rural communities. But now, we know, maybe middle class people and up are being affected by PFAS. There's more of a political will for advocacy to actually address it. So I just don't want us to leave behind, clean water is clean water, whether it's PFOA, lead, or it's just contaminated with other bacteria or viruses. I think everyone has a right to clean water in general. So I just wanted to end with that. All right. So on a positive note too, as well, I'll just throw this in there. There is something called a super fund. And I think it's a federal government program in the United States. And that essentially is allocated to the cleanup of hazardous materials that are known to have negative outcomes from long-term exposure. So that's underway. Not sure the success of those programs, but I just wanted to let you know that that's out there. So given all this, given the highs and lows of this movie, given what you've learned about forever chemicals, and how it's going to forever alter the way you look at your stainless steel refrigerator and your non-stick pans and frozen foods, even like it's a coating in frozen foods and cans and plastic bags. So given all this, given what you've learned, how would you, as a public health professional, what would you rate this movie out of 5 stars?
I think it was a
And
solid.
why?
Okay, I'll go first. I think it was a solid 4.9. Like I thought it was really, really good.
Ooh.
First of all, I'm a little bit
Where's
biased.
the 0.1?
I feel like I can't give it a perfect 5 just because it had a bittersweet ending. And to be honest, it's realistic, which is kind of why it's bittersweet. It goes to show that the fight in a lot of these cases is almost always about what's in the best interest of those involved, not necessarily those that are primarily affected. So who's primarily involved? It's big corporations, the ministry, fancy law firms, media, and press. But who's primarily affected? Quiet, small, marginalized communities, independent farmers, and people who do not have defense against these enormous money-making, chemical compounding corporations, right? So it's bittersweet in the sense that it's realistic. I would give it 4.9 because I thought that it was very educational. Like at no point did I feel like they were just kind of putting in scenes to, for entertainment purposes. And I do think I'm a little bit biased because Bruce Banner is one of my favorite Marvel characters. So I do think I'm a little biased.
Shout out to Mark Ruffalo.
We need to make sure to tag him when we post this.
Right? He's actually going around doing advocacy for a while because of the movie. So it's good. It's good to see like even the actors are not letting the journey end when the movie's released.
Yeah, Mark Ruffalo has been an activist, especially environmental activist, for a long time. So I really think this movie hits home for him. Like it's a very close topic to his heart, and you can see that in the way that he acts. Like, it was just, his acting was so good. It was so phenomenal. I think he's a great actor in general, but the emotions that come, he was like, his character is supposed to be a man of very few words, but the impact that he has is so big. And, he's just a new partner. He's not that experienced, you could say, compared to his other partners and stuff. So, as Jory said, it was an amazing film. Like, I'll go ahead and rate it in my terms. I mean, I tend to give things 5 stars. If I love them, they're getting 5 stars. Okay. So I'd rate it a solid 5 because it taught me so much. Like, I stayed up late and watched this movie, you guys, and I thought I'd fall asleep, but I did not. There's no dramatics to it. It's such a realistic film. You can tell that they didn't add things to just spice up the story. And it's based off of a journalist wrote this article about this lawyer, and it's based off of that, and of course the true story. But it puts so much into perspective about your life. Like, I'm debating throwing out my nonstick pan, you guys. And I love that thing.
But it's a challenge, right? Like, this dangerous chemicals like actually brings convenience into our lives, and it's just a trade-off of how do you want to be a steward of the environment, or do you want to have certain conveniences and at a risk to your own health and the health of others, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go off that, you'll hear your grandparents sometimes say, oh, cancer, like, it wasn't that much when we were growing up, like, it wasn't that prevalent. And my first thought's usually like, well, we didn't detect it as much, we didn't have these technologies to detect it early or something. But when you watch movies like this, you realize there's been such a drastic change in in our environment and the type of chemicals and things that we expose ourselves to, that it's very likely that, cancer and other such health issues have emerged because of things like forever chemicals. So I think it's a really great educational film. Really advocates for the topic for sure.
I think for me, what really made the movie, like also building off what Purva said, is honestly the passion that the main character had, and like this 15-year-long journey that he went on to fight for this case. Like, I think that advocacy just really stands out. And as public health professionals, I think we all have a role to play in terms of advocating for wrongdoing and for issues like this. It's like everyone's part to play, right? So I think just the fact that he was so passionate about fighting for this cause, and he basically gave up his entire life for it. He gave up his health for it. I think that just really stood out to me, and that's what kept me so intrigued into the movie. Like, I didn't stop watching it because it was just his passion that stood out for me.
I think I missed. Did you give it stars?
Yeah, was there a rating?
Oh, yes. I would give it a 5. I'm also like Purva. I'm gonna, if I like it, I'm gonna give it a 5. I give really high ratings. There was nothing bad about it.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I've seen it a couple times, and the first time I did watch it, one of the first things I noticed was in one of the first scenes when he's smiling at the kids on the bicycles. When the children are smiling, you notice that their teeth are a bit tinted. So right away I was suspicious. I'm like, it's in the water. It's in the water. We're about to find out. So it was kind of in the back of my head through the first time I watched it, and the second time I was just like, okay, here we go. But like we said, it covers a lot of different things. It covers, these corporate interests. It covers One Health, human, animal, environmental, mental health, some of the social determinants of health, how a corporation can be so ingrained in one's community that it can affect, the decisions you make and the stances you take on certain, problems in the community or potential problems in the community. I really enjoyed, that the main character, Rob, his journey into his advocacy and really fighting for this for so long, and you could see the strain it put on their family, their kids, his work. It was such a huge professional and personal risk that he undertook, and he's doing such a great job, and that's a lot of work. It's a lot of commitment, and when he kind of fell down and collapsed after talking to his boss, he was like, he had a tremor and he had like a TIA or something.
He had to keep taking pay cuts because of the financial toll on the firm. Yeah,
exactly. And I was tearing up. It was sad because he put so much into everything he was doing, late nights, early mornings, every single second he thought about this, and you could see the passion. And, he sacrificed a lot. And, of course, there's a lot of burnout involved. And not saying that everyone should go and be super and do the same thing Rob did. But, I mean, it takes a lot of sacrifice for sure to make a change, especially against his corporation.
Yeah, even if we can do 50% of the amount that he did, I feel you'd get a lot of really strong movement for so many topics in public health. It really motivates you to do that.
Yeah, but it also shows that it's not a part-time job. So I think 50, it's like, how committed do you have to be to something? Like he basically committed his life to fighting chemical companies now. And like LaShawn, I wanted to bring up too, there's that scene. So after he kind of did he recover?
Yeah,
or when he was in the hospital, and then his wife. So even though he obviously the strain on the marriage, he was essentially obsessed with getting to the bottom of this. And obviously they have a family to take care of, and at times that he would be at odds with his wife. So even though I would say she was generally understanding, but because of the pressure from his workplace, I think she had a word with the boss and said, like, you will not let him feel like a failure. Like, he's many things, but you will not make him feel like a failure. And I thought that for me was a bone chilling, like, you're in this now, you need to continue supporting him because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's what you need if you're advocating, right? That was a very positive situation. So sorry to cut you off. What's your rating?
I would have to say I would give it a solid 4 points.
You're copying me. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So I need to go to like the 10th decimal place or like the 100th decimal place. Okay, I would. There it is. I was waiting for that. All right, I would give it a 4.8. I would give it a 4.8, and that 0.2 that's missing, I would just say, we have a lot more to talk about in the series, a bunch of other movies, so I don't want to give a perfect 5 out.
I'm going to be that person that gives 5 so many times. You be prepared.
That's your persona. That's good.
It's a great movie though. Like, it's one of my faves. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. I would give it just to be different.
Don't copy me.
Gordon. I'll give it a 4.5, so 90%. And I just I'll take a little bit off because and I know for theatricals there's a little bit dramatization of stuff, so it wasn't entirely accurately of what happened, but the important pieces were accurate. So that on that note, I'll take off marks. But I think it's a very rewatchable movie. That's the first time I was introduced to learning about forever chemicals. I like movies that take you on a journey of investigation, sort of like an investigative journalism, and you're thinking along with the character, and you're like, oh no, and then the character's like, oh no. So I think I learned a lot from the movie. My YouTube feed now is just filled of forever chemical stuff. And then I was able to learn that this is not only affecting just one small rural community that you can just turn off the news and go about your business. It's likely in our water too. So I think it was a very educational experience for anyone who's in public health or just the general population. And there was a lot to take away from it, from how you approach your own professional life, your personal life, how much do you want to commit yourself to a specific cause. And like, he was older and he didn't really find his quote unquote calling until that age. So it also shows you that there's a lot of life to live potentially before you find something that you want to commit your life to. So that was I think I really enjoyed the movie, and I would watch it again. And I've watched it probably 4 times. So I highly recommend. And shout out to, so we raise praises on Mark Ruffalo, but we have to put praise on Sarah Bilott, the wife of Rob Bilott, and Rob Bilott, who's actually being portrayed in the movie.
It's so hard to do things like this without a support system.
Yes, there we go. Social support networks is a social determinant of health. All right. On that note, this was Rewind. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.